Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
"2017 was another troubling, complicated, thrilling year for the Jewish people. In March of 2017, a wave of bomb threats were made against JCCs and other Jewish institutions across the United States, and Jewish cemeteries were desecrated in St. Louis and Philadelphia, prompting Jewish organizations such as the ADL to warn of an increase in anti-Semitic groups in America, only to learn later that the bomb threats were made all by a troubled Jewish teenager trying to impress a girl. Also in March, Intel announced it would spend $14 billion to acquire the Israeli company Mobileye, which gives computers a sense of their physical surroundings and may help create driverless cars. It's the largest high-tech acquisition in the history of Israel. May was a painful month as UNESCO passed a series of anti-Israel resolutions denying Jewish ties to Jerusalem and other sites throughout Israel, including Hebron and the Cave of Machpelah. UNESCO also criticized Israel's actions in what it called occupied Jerusalem, declaring Israel's sovereignty over the Israeli capital city to be null and void. While 22 countries supported the UNESCO resolutions, the United States was one of 10 countries to vote in opposition, and the U.S. announced it will withdraw from UNESCO due to its historically insidious anti-Israel bias. Israel also said it would pull out of UNESCO. In June of 2017, the Jewish community was fractured when a compromise solution for a third egalitarian section of the Western Wall collapsed, when the ultra-Orthodox parties in the Knesset threatened to withdraw from the ruling coalition if the compromise was implemented, which would bring down the Netanyahu coalition government. Many Jewish leaders in America were outraged by the Prime Minister's capitulation to Israeli politics, and some even threatened withdrawing financial aid and political support from the State of Israel. On a happier note, in June, 23-year-old Ben Platt won the Tony Award for Best Performance by a Leading Actor in a Musical for his spectacular performance in the title role of Dear Evan Hansen. Ben is the son of Tony-winning producer Mark Platt, who served as the co-chair of the 2017 General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America. In July, terror struck Israel again when 2 Israeli Druze border policemen were murdered outside the Temple Mount by Palestinians who had smuggled weapons into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel responded by taking the unprecedented step of closing the Temple Mount and then of installing metal detectors, which prompted the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem to call for a protest march in which 3 Palestinians were killed in clashes with Israeli security forces, while Mahmoud Abbas ordered the suspension of all official contact with Israel until it removed the new security measures, which Israel did remove to restore order. In August, a corruption investigation enveloped Prime Minister Netanyahu for taking a series of bribes in cigars and champagne from Israeli movie billionaire Arnon Milchan. Mr. Netanyahu is currently pushing a Knesset bill that would protect any sitting prime minister from certain criminal investigations. In October of 2017, Fatah and Hamas signed another unity agreement, which they again were unable to implement. In contrast, in October, 6 Jewish scientists were awarded Nobel Prizes in the fields of physiology, medicine, and physics, one of whom, Michael Rosbach, is the child of Holocaust survivors who fled Germany in 1938. November of this year marked milestone anniversaries in the history of the State of Israel with the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, in which, in 1917, Great Britain began the diplomatic process of implementing the Zionist dream of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Mahmoud Abbas called upon Great Britain to apologize for the Balfour Declaration. And with the 70th anniversary of the United Nations Partition Plan vote in 1947, the culmination of world diplomatic sanction of a sovereign Jewish state in Palestine alongside another Arab state. Ironically, also in November, the Birthright Israel program announced it would no longer work with the Reform movement on the grounds that Reform Judaism was not mobilizing enough students for birthright trips to Israel. And in November, Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Tzipi Hotovely, was excoriated for merely stating that American Jews rarely have children serving in military situations of danger, and therefore American Jews often do not understand the Israeli experience. Only days earlier, the Hillel office at Princeton University had withdrawn its invitation for the minister to speak at Hillel on the subject of BDS, when progressive activists on campus argued she was a racist propagandist. Hotovely did eventually speak at the Princeton Chabad House, and the National Hillel office later apologized for withdrawing its invitation. Ms. Hotovely was then pressured into apologizing for her remarks when Prime Minister Netanyahu threatened to force the Likud minister out of the Knesset. And to close out the year, in December, the House of Representatives passed the Taylor Force Act, which would prevent the U.S. State Department from certain funding of the Palestinian Authority unless and until the PA stops rewarding terrorist murderers with pensions and other monetary payments. The Taylor Force Act currently waits Senate approval. And on December 6, 2017, President Donald Trump made Jewish history and set off a firestorm of controversy inside the Jewish world and out when he announced his administration now formally recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital city, and that plans have begun to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And those are many of the events which shaped the Jewish year of 2017, another year of historic Jewish proportion. I'm Mark Golub, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our annual year-end retrospective roundtable, as I am joined once again by an outstanding panel to offer insight and analysis of what's been the most significant Jewish events and people of the year. Let me introduce our panel to you, though you may already know many of them very well. We are again joined by Stephen Bayme, Director of the American Jewish Committee's Kaufman Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, and Steve is a frequent lecturer throughout the country on issues relating to Israel and American Jewish life. Eric Yoffie is President Emeritus of the Union for Reform Judaism, which he headed for some 25 years. Eric is now a widely read columnist who can be read in Haaretz, the Huffington Post, and online at ericyoffie.com. Eric is also a frequent rabbinic scholar in residence in Jewish communities throughout America. I'm also pleased to have joining our panel for the first time Elie Abadie, who is the founding rabbi of one of the most dynamic and successful Sephardic synagogues in America, the Safra Synagogue in Manhattan. Currently, Elie is the rabbi of the new Sephardic synagogue in New York, Sharei Mizrach, and heads the Sephardic Day School, the Sephardic Academy of Manhattan. And if that were not enough, Elie is also a practicing gastroenterologist. And always joining me to share his perspective and insight on JBS is award-winning author and novelist Thane Rosenbaum, and I hope many of you are familiar with Secondhand Smoke, The Golems of Gotham, and his most recent novel, How Sweet It Is, about Jewish life in Miami Beach in the watershed year of 1972. Thane is also a senior fellow at NYU Law School and the director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society, and his op-ed pieces appear in the Washington Post and a host of other secular and Jewish publications, often in defense of the State of Israel. And gentlemen, it is so wonderful to have you once again sitting with me. Elie, you're joining us for the first time. Welcome. I'm most appreciative you come out here and just banter about the year 2017. Good morning, Steve. Okay, so gentlemen, I want to begin as I always do. Steve, I want to hear what you think was the most significant single event in the Jewish world in 2017.
Well, June 25th really was an historic date. Aside from being the 67th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War, which is worth remembering itself, but it really was the, as you mentioned in your opening, what represented the freezing, even the cancellation of the compromise over the Kotel. And what you didn't mention, but which really has to be added on to that, is that the conversion bill, cementing an Orthodox monopoly over conversion, passed its first reading in the Knesset.
And why, of all the events, do you feel that is more significant than anything else in this past year?
The events themselves are tangible and significant. If anything, I think conversion is actually more important than the Western Wall. But the real point of being significant is that it exposed the chasm between American Jewry and Israel. In my lifetime, I've never seen the chasm being as wide as this, and I've been around for a good many years. I've never seen the anger being so expressed so visibly that American Jews, American Jewish leaders in particular, feel greatly betrayed by the State of Israel, that they spend their time and energy working on behalf, and essentially they're being told their Jewish identity is not legitimate, recognized, or accepted, and that anger has been sustained now for a good 6 months, and I don't see it being solved or being resolved anytime soon.
Okay, fascinating, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss it if anybody else has not mentioned the same one. Eric, for you, what's the most significant event of 2017?
I would say that the inauguration of Donald Trump as President of the United States is far and away the most significant event. The fact that he has been president has had an impact on Jewish well-being in the United States and on the safety and stability of the State of Israel. I would suggest potentially in a dramatic way. And I think it is more important than anything else that has occurred during the past year.
Okay, we'll get a chance to talk about that as well. All right, so Elie Abadie, here you are. I'm asking you also, of all the things that you saw in 2017, what's the most significant event to you?
I will say the same thing. I identify with what Eric mentioned. However, I think the most important one is December 6th, the declaration by President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. I think by far, so far in this decade, is the most important announcement, and probably so far of the century. I think it is at the same level as the Balfour Declaration, almost at the same level as the Partition Plan, and also at the same level of President Truman recognizing Israel. Why I say so? Because it will make a great difference for the region, for the State of Israel, and for the rest of the world.
And do you say that in a positive context?
Absolutely, in a positive context. And the interesting part is that no other president after him will be able to move that embassy back to any other city, because it is the only country, as far as I know, that by law is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And no other country has had that privilege to have a law by Congress passed to recognize that.
All right, Thane, you too. What's the most important event to you of 2017?
I think the passage of the Taylor-Force Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. We're still awaiting Senate confirmed vote as well.
Do you expect it to pass the Senate?
I do, although I hope the JBS viewers will call their senators after hearing today's discussion. I think it's interesting how the four of us had very different perspectives.
It is.
But to me, that's far and away the most important. And we can talk about that later, about the depth of those feelings.
And again, although I mentioned it in the open, remind our viewers what the Taylor-Force Act is.
So Taylor-Force was an American veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan who was getting his MBA at Vanderbilt, and he and a few friends went to Israel. And while they were outside the old city, he was stabbed and killed to death during this stabbing intifada, which bears worth mentioning that Taylor Force is not Jewish, and he was a victim of the stabbing intifada. What people don't know, but Taylor Force's parents were outraged to discover, is that the Palestinian Authority has been paying essentially an incentive program of salaries and stipends and lump sum payments and tuition benefits and life insurance and health insurance for people who kill Jews in any different capacity, civilians, military, whomever. You can receive as much as $15,000 a month if you actually are in jail for 30 years. In the history of Jewish, the history of the diaspora and the history of Jews in the Holy Land, Jews have been expelled from countries. They've been subjected to all kinds of discrimination, of course, genocide. Never before in history, until we've seen now with the Palestinian Authority, has there been a bounty on the heads of Jews, that there's an incentive to kill a Jew. Hitler didn't do this. This is something that the Palestinians invented. Go kill a Jew, and your children will get tuition benefits, your family will get health insurance, and you'll receive a monthly salary. And the more time you spend in jail, obviously based on the severity of the crime, the more monthly payment stipend you'll receive.
And Taylor Force Act would?
The Taylor Force Act, which essentially deprived the Palestinian Authority dollar for dollar. Up until now, they spent $350 million a year. 8% of their budget is on these salaries, these incentives. And it would essentially wipe out, because taxpayer dollars have been contributing to the killing of Jews. And most people, most Jews don't realize this. And it was only through the efforts of the family of Taylor Force and a few congressmen, Lindsey Graham I think is one of them, that has brought this to our attention. And everyone knows this is happening. The Israelis know this is happening, certainly the State Department. But this is the very first time, and it sends a very strong message that Jewish blood is not for sale.
And of course, again, it has not yet passed both houses of Congress, but you hope it will?
I hope it will, and again, I'm always surprised at how few people know about the Taylor Force Act, and for that reason.
It's so fascinating to me that all four of you had your own individual most important event of 2017 from a Jewish perspective. And I'm going to begin with you.
Sure.
I'm going to ask anybody here to comment. You said already what Steve said resonates with you. Elie or Thane, when you hear that that is, to Steve, the most significant event, how do you assess it and how do you analyze this? And you're a practicing rabbi. You are in the Sephardic community, and many of our viewers are Ashkenazic and have not experienced Sephardic Judaism. And your community is distinctive in and of itself. But how do you react to Steve's description of the American Jewish response to the collapse of the Kotel compromise?
I'll tell you, I have to disagree that that's not one of the most important issues that happened to the Jewish world.
You don't think it is?
I don't think it is at all. And how do you assess that? You assess that, but what are the consequences and repercussions of a decision like that? If you take a poll of the Israelis, that would be the lowest in that entire poll of issues that are important for Israelis.
But you understand what Steve's point was.
Of course I do. Of course I do.
It threatens, he argues, the connection between American Jewry, a portion of American Jewry, and the State of Israel.
I have to say again that it is an important issue, but certainly not the significance that is being given. And again, the reasons is you have to see what are the consequences and what are the repercussions of a decision like that. Unfortunately, the breakup between American Jewry, let me put it, between a segment of the American Jewry and the State of Israel has been happening for the last 30 years. So this is not going to be the first thing or the last thing that is going to maybe increase that breakup. At the end of the day or at the end of the year, you're going to see that that is not as significant. That issue is not as significant because there are so many other issues that are important for the State of Israel and for the Jewish people in general.
Thane, what's your reaction to this?
Well, is it possible that we can bifurcate the issues? Because Steve introduced the idea that it's more than the Kotel. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to bifurcate them, but I think the conversion is a much larger question.
Yes, by the way, in essence, it's not the detail. It's about the break that some are suggesting, the collapse of this compromise deal. The compromise was a large compromise deal.
Right.
The Kotel being symbolic. There was going to be a third section where men and women could stand together, where non-Orthodox Jews could practice Judaism as they saw fit. The compromise was supposed to include the fact that there would be only one entrance to the Western Wall area, so that the third section by Robinson's Arch would not seem, a poor cousin. All of it would be the Western Wall. And there was some feeling within the ultra-Orthodox community that this was a violation of what they believed was true about that area as an Orthodox shul, and that ultimately a compromise that was worked out over a long period of time, spearheaded by Natan Sharansky, but it had the help, the imprimatur of Rick Jacobs of the Reform Movement, Julie Schoenfeld of the Conservative Movement, and Jerry Silverman of the Jewish Federations of North America. So there was this real feeling that the relationship was there was steps forward were being taken. And so the rug was ripped out of that. I think there are very valid reasons for that, which I don't hear people address. I don't know any government which would tear itself down over this kind of issue. But what Steve is saying is that, and Eric is saying it also, I haven't given him a chance to talk, but he will, that that it has caused a breach of such magnitude of all the events of the year. Steve starts there. I'm asking you to respond to that.
Well, look, Steve is a longtime leader of the American Jewish Committee, and obviously his deep sensitivity is, there's not that many Jews in the world, and it's important for Jews around the world, and certainly in the United States, to feel a deep and abiding connection to Israel. The conversion question to me is much more profound, because I do think that here's an area where, when you have this kind of exercising authority only among the religious Jews, the rabbinical Jews of Israel, you have essentially excluded a gigantic number of Jews, which is globally a small number of Jews, who feel disassociated or disconnected because they're not provided the same kinds of tangible rights as what it means to be a Jew in Israel.
Okay. So does it trouble you?
The Kotel is different to me.
Forget the Kotel. No,
yes, of course. How could we not all be concerned that we would be alienating Jews around the world? The purpose of Israel is to love Israel. Its not purpose is to feel alienated from it.
What do you think the appropriate American Jewish response should be to the collapse of this compromise?
It's very much related to the Deputy Foreign Minister's Hotovely's remark. I think they're similar, even though one is a religious issue. One is a religious issue and one is really a secular issue. But they're really similar, which is, there are people, I am not one of them, who feel very comfortable telling Israelis how to live their lives. Right? I've never been comfortable because I've never served in the IDF. My children don't serve in the IDF. I just think that there's a certain sense of humility and awe about what it means to be on the ground defending the homeland. You can make the same argument among religious Jews, right? That's why I would make a different argument about the Kotel and conversions. It is an Orthodox synagogue, and the wall is more important in this regard and I'm sure Eric is going to disagree with this, but more important to
count on it.
Yeah, it's just, to me, the how one enters and prays at the wall feels different to me.
How should American Jews respond?
Well, without a sense of alienation, which is impossible in this situation. I don't think that the infighting in the Jewish community between Israel and American Jews is good for Jews. Obviously not good for Jews. I don't know the resolution. I mean, this is why it's interesting to hear for someone like Steve, because this idea of this connection between the United States Jewry, world Jewry, and Israel is an abiding concern.
Okay. All right, Eric, you've been very patient. Your feelings on this issue.
The State of Israel was created by the Jewish people for the Jewish people. It is the homeland of the Jewish people. Relations between the Jewish people and the state are central to its very being. Those Jews around the world don't need permission to express views on issues of central concern, and particularly religious issues, which are one of the most important things that bind us together. Now, over the course of time, certain specific things have become symbolic of this broader relationship. In the 80s and the 90s, it was the who is a Jew question. And we argued about the specifics, although specifics were less important than the fact that that was symbolic of the relationship and of our mutual concern and mutual commitment. Over the course of the last 20 years, that has shifted really to the Kotel. Now, the specifics here are less important than the fact that in dealing with the Kotel on both sides, this is our means of creating that tie, expressing that commitment. And what was so important here is that the Prime Minister understood this. The Prime Minister instituted a process to work out this relationship and resolve the issue. And then after 3.5 years of negotiations, of promises, of commitments, and of a decision, in fact, by the government of Israel, he simply one day said, never mind. He said, I'm backing out of a commitment that I have made to demonstrate the commitment to the wider Jewish people that I have talked about. And he did this because of a threat from ultra-Orthodox parties and because of his own weakened political position as a result of the corruption charges that you had mentioned before. Had he not been challenged by these corruption issues, my own view is he would have brushed it aside. But because he was afraid of potentially being indicted, and then he would absolutely have needed the support of the Orthodox parties in order to avoid a resignation, this simply made worse a situation that was bad to begin with. But unlike the who is a Jew, and the who is a Jew issue, for 20 years, whenever there was a crisis, somehow we worked it out. And we walked away, and then no one was completely happy, but everybody felt that their needs had been met. Here, after extended negotiations under his auspices, he simply walked away, and that was seen by world Jewry as a slap in the face. And then afterwards, he blamed the non-Orthodox movements for the failure of the talks. He simply lied about it. He went to the GA, the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations, and he simply lied about what happened, and he said, we simply promised to fix up the space. We're in the process of doing that. We've met all our commitments. There wasn't one single person in the room who felt that that was true. There were 100 ways that he could have handled this better. Even if you accept that politically he had no alternative, there were 100 ways that he could have reached out to world Jewry, embraced them, and demonstrated that he understood the commitment. He didn't do any of those things. And we've paid a terrible price for that. And that profoundly distresses me. It's created a problem that we need to address.
By the way, if someone had then come to, if you had been still president of the URJ, and somebody came to you and said, what is the appropriate American Jewish response? And here we're really talking about the non-Orthodox communities of America. What should the appropriate response be? And you were in a leadership position as you were, you're still in that position. What would you have argued for?
I would have argued for challenging and confronting the government of Israel, but
How?
Demonstrations, meetings, articles in the Jewish press.
Here in America?
Both in America and in Israel, making our case in a very vocal way.
Fine.
And at the same time, increasing our broader commitment to the State of Israel, making it clear that our argument is not with the Jewish state, which is, again, a creation of the Jewish people. It's with this particular government and its particular decisions. And in particular, deepening our connections to our own movement in Israel, which is really our vehicle there for fighting this battle and advocating for this cause.
I want to go on record. I think the way you articulated it was perfect, brilliant. It reflects the best of what we want both Israel and the Jewish community here in America to be, and you didn't say one word about a break. In fact, you said the opposite. We should increase the Jewish connection to the state of Israel and make it clear our commitment is to Israel, not to a specific government.
The ultra-Orthodox parties, and I've said it quite openly, they want us to walk away.
I said, but you understand that
We aren't going to walk away.
Okay, Eric, that's not what was said. What was said was, we are, and this is what Steve began with. What was said was quite the opposite. It was, how dare you do this to us? We're turning our back on you.
The leadership never said that. The leadership of the Reform and Conservative movements
That's not exactly.
never said that.
And part of the problem is that a Rick Jacobs and a Julie Schoenfeld have come under criticism because they have not said what Eric Yoffie just said. And there was a story in the New York Times right after this where somebody had pledged $2 million. He was taking the $2 million back. And there was nobody in the non-Orthodox Jewish establishment, not a Rick Jacobs, not a Julie Schoenfeld, not a Jerry Silverman, no one, who said publicly that is a wholly inappropriate response by American Jews.
Well, I don't want to get involved in the specifics, other than to say this past Shabbat, Rick Jacobs addressed 6,000 people at the Reform Convention in Boston. It was a drush Shabbat morning. It was devoted entirely to Israel. He made the points that I made before in a somewhat different way and affirmed unequivocally support for the state of Israel.
Excellent. Okay. You started this discussion.
Right, sure.
Comment in general.
Well, first of all, just one preliminary comment. Putting aside Rick Jacobs' comments, Danny Gordis made it very clear in a rather controversial op-ed piece that American Jews should be withdrawing support from Israel.
Yes, and by the way, normally I don't talk about me in this respect.
Right.
I wrote an editorial response to that.
Right.
I am a huge fan of Danny Gordis. I thought he was 100% wrong. Danny Gordis then comes to America and in public says one of the only mistakes he's ever made was that he hit the send button on that editorial before talking to his wife. He regrets it, and he says he never should have written it.
Okay, I'm glad.
So let's not quote Danny Gordis on this issue.
I'm glad to hear that. The point remains is that we need more engagement rather than withdrawal, and that I think is one of the lessons that came out of this. But there are three reasons that I think of what went wrong during this dispute. Number one, and this Eric alluded to, is that compromises are meant to be implemented, and when you don't implement them, it's a breach of trust. In other words, it was an extended process. People thought we were moving together, working together, and suddenly it's like all that means nothing, and we can simply cancel it at a flick of a wrist. Second, and here I speak as an Orthodox Jew. Personally, I work for a secular Jewish organization, but my own practice is Orthodoxy. I am deeply concerned about and deeply resentful of a growth of Orthodox power. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's Orthodox Jews are free and should be encouraged to express themselves on social issues. They have a lot to say. But invoking the coercive power of the state to enforce an Orthodox position, I find that deeply problematical, and I resent it simply as it's not the Orthodoxy that I speak for.
Beautiful.
Thirdly, I said before that the issues themselves, there is significance. Conversion is more tangible than the Kotel. The one thing I disagree with Thane, I should mention, is that the Kotel is not an Orthodox synagogue. If anything, there's probably been more fetishization of the Kotel over the course of the last 50 years. The Kotel is a national shrine of the Jewish people. And to define it as an Orthodox synagogue, I think is completely mistaken. That said, the real lesson of all this, where I say what went wrong, is that this breach between Israel and American Jewry is directly related also to a reality that we have in Jewish life here, that assimilation is our most critical problem domestically, internally. One of our critical vehicles in addressing assimilation is the State of Israel. That's what the underlying principle of the entire birthright program. So along comes the State of Israel, one of the key sponsors of this major vehicle that I embrace and endorse. I don't think it goes far enough, but that's another question. That one of the sponsors of that major vehicle is basically saying, our place is not your place. when you have a health minister, Yaakov Litzman, who was very much a part of this, all these negotiations, he said, forget about the reform movement having any role at the Kotel. Never, under no circumstances. Well, again, what's the message of the state of Israel, a health minister, an official governmental official, a chief rabbi of Jerusalem, saying Reform Jews are worse than Holocaust deniers? Now, I question exactly what does worse than Holocaust deniers mean? In other words, how low a level are you going to sink to? Yet this was stated by, again, an official of the Israeli government. So in this respect, I see this as the reason I think I disagree with Rabbi Abadie here is that if you're focusing on the issues themselves, conversion is an issue. Kotel is more symbolic than anything else. I don't think it's the issues themselves that are of overriding historic importance, although they are important. What really is overriding historic importance is that we have spent the last 50 years trying to build closer ties between American Jewry and Israel. Those ties are endangered by actions here taken by the Israeli government and its ultra-Orthodox minority within it. I see this as a crisis of enormous proportions. I've never seen a chasm this wide between American Jewry and Israel. And if we ignore it or try to say, well, this will pass, gamze yavor, if we ignore that, the closeness of ties that is essential to Israeli national security, namely the presence of an American Jewish community that is strong, vibrant, and assertive in going down to Washington saying we want the United States and Israel to be as closely aligned as possible. That national security is endangered if we can't transmit that same sense of attachment to the next generation. What I would grant is that the exception to that rule is the Orthodox community, that they see what's going on in Israel and they like it. They're more attached to it. But Orthodoxy is a small percentage of where the American Jewish community is going. And then there are those of us within Orthodoxy that see what's going on in Israel and don't like it, and we express ourselves accordingly.
Okay, two follow-up quickly. Number one, do you feel the leadership of the Reform Conservative movement, basically non-Orthodox leadership in America, did what they could to build the bridge that Eric talks about? Or do you feel that in some way not enough was done? In other words, I'm concerned that the gulf, the chasm that you're discussing, you're referring to, is real. But I'm worried that it's real because there was not enough responsible leadership saying to the Jewish community, we have a problem, there's a problem, but understand something. If a Reformed Jew, a conservative Jew, a non-Orthodox Jew, a secular Jew gets off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport and spends 2 weeks, a month in the state of Israel, at no moment will he come across this problem. The state of Israel, the people of Israel, do not reflect what an ideological defect in a political system which gives Orthodox parties a disproportionate amount of power has no impact on how you're going to experience Israel, how the ordinary Israeli treats you, how Jewish institutions treat you, how hotels treat you, how tours treat you, how schools treat you, how camps treat you, how kibbutzim treat you. Don't imagine that this ideological glitch represents the tone of either the state of Israel or the Israeli people. I want to hear that said. And by the way, I am a non-Orthodox rabbi. I would love to be able to perform, to be a Masader Kiddushin at a wedding in the state of Israel. I would love to be, if I were living in Israel, I'd love to be subsidized as a non-Orthodox rabbi, just as Orthodox rabbis are subsidized in the state of Israel. However, the fact that at the moment that has not yet happened, I feel, number one, doesn't in any way alienate me from Israel, which I think is what Eric was saying. And number two, I believe, as Thane said, ultimately there's an integrity to the Israeli people. Until the Israeli people care about who stands at the Western Wall, until the Israeli people care about whether I get to marry or whether Eric gets to marry somebody in the state of Israel, until the Israeli people say, we want a different system. I want American Jews to understand they have a right to protest. I like it. Yes, have them create all kind of marches in America and in Israel, but don't pull away from Israel. Don't say, and some people said this, now we're going to withhold financial support. We're going to withhold political support. And that's what you're referring to. You're saying the chasm may spill over into a lack of Jewish political support for the state of Israel. I find that outrageous. I find it heinous from a Jewish perspective. And I want Jews to say what Eric said. You broke an agreement. There are reasons why you could have done it in a different way. And we're going to hold you responsible. We're going to make noise. But we're not going to withdraw support. There will not be a greater chasm. And I'm worried you're right. But I want people like you and all of us here at this table to say, no, that's not what should be the result of this decision.
Well, 3 comments, Mark. Number one, in terms of the overall trajectory, there's more education about Israel taking place today in the various Jewish educational systems, including the conservative reform movements, than there ever has been before. Now, people getting up in front of the classrooms, obviously they're free to say whatever they want to say, but presumably you're teaching a course about modern Israel. Your overall message, in one form or another, is that of greater engagement, not greater withdrawal. 2, a lot of the things that alienate you are a reflection of passion. And the passion is very real. As I say, it's sustained. Well, there are positive sides to passion. It's a statement also of how deeply we care. So in that respect, while again, perhaps some statements have gone over the top, like the gentleman who says, I'm going to withdraw $2 million, I'd say the sharpest of statements are reflective of the very deep passion of how deeply Jewish leaders care. Thirdly, as far as my fears are legitimate, I think, for a very different reason than the ones you've mentioned. Namely that, face the facts, American Jewry has a problem with distancing from matters Jewish generally. That spills over into distancing from Israel. So here we are, a generation of Jewish leaders. No one would ever question Rick Jacobs' identification with the state of Israel.
Absolutely.
The question is, what's going to happen to younger people who have not grown up with that deep sense of attachment, that the message they're getting in
From
one form.
From whom?
I think, first the message begin with Jerusalem. You know, we have statements coming out of Birthright, if you will, students coming back, been on the Birthright program, saying they don't like what they've seen. Now, in that respect, my comment is really that, and my fear, is that the same degree of attachment that currently exists in the current generation of Jewish leadership will not be transmitted to the next generation, because Jewish leaders are struggling right now with the reality of an Israel that in one form or another is giving them negative messages about what their place is as non-Orthodox Jews.
Okay. Any thoughts, any comments?
Yeah, I think that the reaction of the, I would not say world jury, because world jury means everybody. So I would say a very segment of a world jury, and I could say that mostly American jury, because South American jury, it's a very, very small segment that were against that. You have a tremendous traditional Orthodox communities from Mexico all the way down to the Patagonia and also Europe. So you're talking about a smaller segment of world jury that were unhappy. And the response, I think, was not because of Israel's action and the disengagement of this segment of American jury with Israel, not because as a response of Israel's actions, but because there is a lack of Israel education. There is a lack of Israel-loving education. Whatever education a young man or young woman, when they go to synagogue maybe once a year or twice a year, and they hear their rabbi criticizing Israel, that is what they're going to internalize. So the result of that reaction, or the cause of that reaction of disengagement with Israel, is years of lack of Israel education, years of Israel criticism maybe in those synagogues and in those institutions that led people to react in such a way. I think the best way they could have reacted is, we are unhappy, write some articles. I would not demonstrate here in the United States. I would demonstrate in Israel, write some articles, communicate privately, and say, let's sit down again and see how we're going to resolve this issue in a way that will not bring down the government of Israel. Again, I think what Thane mentioned, and you also repeated it, that when it's important to the Israelis. Of course, Jews all over the world have a right to express their opinion, but I don't think they have the right to dictate to Israel. As long as we're not citizens there, as long as I have a son who went to Golani for 3 years and participated in the war in Gaza, and he saw his own platoon friend who was killed with a bomb. So I understand a little bit, but I still cannot dictate. So we can opine and we could say, Israel, we would like you to do this, but we could certainly not dictate to Israel. And as long as these issues are not that important for the Israeli population, we cannot really force them to do it.
First of all,
if I may just finish.
Done.
And if you take a poll of the Israelis, that issue is one of the lowest in the totem pole of importance for Israelis. One of the reasons, again, why the Reform and Conservative Judaism has not taken roots in Israel is because the majority of the population does not identify with it. They do not identify with that brand of Judaism. Maybe one day they will, but as long as the majority of Israelis do not, you're not going to have successes in Israel. And the Kotel may not be an Orthodox synagogue, it's true, but it has been, at least for the last thousands of years.
Not thousands.
Oh, since
Not
Israel establishment, maybe? I don't know.
Not
We
even
only,
that.
it was only discovered in the 14th century.
I'd rather not call it Orthodox
in the 20s,
because...
there was mixed worship at the Kotel. We have a historical evidence.
So once the Israelis see that these are important issues, then you'll have a greater chance of success.
We keep assuming here, by the way, that somehow religious issues are incidental for Israelis. They aren't at all. I think we ought to get some of those polls and look at them, by the way. A number of Israelis who sympathize with the Reform and Conservative position on the Kotel is, in fact, very high. In the last poll that I saw was a majority. Second of all, the broader question that Mark raised about, and that Steve raised, about the Orthodox monopoly is, in fact, an issue of huge importance in Israel and widely unpopular with the Israeli population. The election in 2013, which was run basically around this whole question of coercion and, well, should the Orthodox be drafted into the army and so on and so forth. And it was really a referendum which demonstrated that Israelis were sick and tired of being imposed upon by a coercive, religious establishment. And then the politicians, in their wisdom for reasons of their own, after taking some significant steps, to move away from that coercion, 2 years later, for reasons that had to do with totally different things, simply reversed every decision that they had made. My point being that these issues are of concern to Israelis. We shouldn't simply dismiss it and suggest that somehow that they don't care. But under any circumstances,
of course, but it's a small amount.
Mark wants American Jews to speak up more emphatically because he doesn't want a breach between Israel and the Jewish people. I agree. I want mainstream Israelis, including the leaders of Israel, I want to say to them, you have to help us here. You have to help us. We're a single people. We support each other. We are one Jewish family.
Absolutely.
There are things that you can do right now, to strengthen those ties. Now, the stories, we've heard these stories again and again. There was just another round of these stories of Netanyahu repeating to his associates, Reform and Conservative Judaism are going to disappear in 50 years. Maybe he believes that. I don't happen to believe that. I think that's wrong. I think the fact that those stories are reiterated, and then again, and this is the message that we're hearing out of the office of the Prime Minister of Israel, is again, it's an outrage, it's an insult. What is he thinking? Why isn't he binding up the wounds? Why isn't he saying, I can't do it right now for coalition reasons. Let me tell you what I can do for you. Let me tell you how I can be helpful to the reform movement and the conservative movement. Let me tell you how I can, under current law, tomorrow he could do things for reform and conservative synagogues and the reform and conservative movement that would help them in their effort to be established in Israel. Why isn't he doing it at this time of crisis? And it shows a certain either contempt or very best indifference about these issues that Steve and I are saying are so important. So let's address our concerns to both sides.
Fair enough. You want to say something?
I do. I have two comments. One, I want to let's briefly talk about this debate about whether the Kotel itself is even an Orthodox synagogue. I appreciated what Steve said, but I think that even if I don't have the historical significance correct, I think what I do want to say about that is I do think that, look, I'm not a religious Jew. I think that it means more to the Orthodox than it means to me. It's a Masada light. You know, there are other historic places that have the same significance. And my respect for the Orthodox community is to say, look, I just think the wall means more to them. And the way the Marines protect the wall, it's the Orthodox that protect that wall. And that's why I think it's a very different question in terms of thinking about the coercive power of Orthodox Judaism.
Oh, you don't disagree with that.
Over conversion, I feel very differently.
You do disagree?
I have an amendment to it anyway.
All right,
Amendment.
but let me just...
Hold on, let him amend.
Okay.
All right. Thane, I think it's somewhat myopic. Yeah, sure, the average Israeli doesn't want to pray at the Western Wall.
He doesn't even visit the Western
Doesn't even
Wall.
visit the Western Wall.
Never seen it.
On the 9th of Av, the place of pilgrimage is actually Yad Vashem rather than the place of the destruction. But remember, from 1951 to 1967, again, you had a signed agreement, signed and sealed, between the Jordanian government and Israel, allowing freedom of access. Along comes that agreement is not only violated, it's simply never implemented.
Exactly.
Creates an impression, obviously a sense of how can we trust these people? It's a breach of trust. And second, a sense of here we are in the historical homeland of the Jews, and we cannot even visit, part of that because this Jordanian soldier that's going to kill me if I try to go there. Along comes 67. You have Moshe Dayan, a very secular Israeli, who I'm sure never prayed per se, but his comment was, we've returned to our holy places, never to depart from there. Now that was a statement of national affirmation, of connection to Jerusalem, to the Western Wall, to all that symbolizes. Again, if you're talking to me in theological terms, I think the wall has been fetishized. It's not the wall of the temple, it's a retaining wall. If you oppose egalitarian or non-Orthodox services there, you may as well oppose them on Agron Street. In other words, in Jerusalem itself, because the wall itself has no intimate connection with the Temple Mount itself. But that's a very different question.
So that more so should say, why such a big fuss then?
The fetishization is on both
right?
sides. That's
No,
my
of course,
point.
of course.
The fetishization on both sides. But as a symbol, the Western Wall belongs to the entire Jewish people. To define it as an Orthodox synagogue, again, that's developed historically after 67 with the development of the plaza. I think it's one.
Forgive me.
But
I want to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Is that true about kashrut too?
In what
So,
sense?
for example, how about the Jewish calendar?
Calendar is a unifying symbol for the Jewish people.
Just a minute. If at some point the Israeli people decided they didn't care about having a Jewish calendar, would that bother you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would it bother you if many Israeli Jews said, and they do say, we don't observe kashrut, and we want to be able to go to restaurants in Israel that do not have kosher food? Does that bother you?
Well, the growth of non-kosher restaurants in Jerusalem over the last 20 years has been enormous.
Does it bother you?
Does it bother me that there are non-kosher restaurants in Jerusalem? No, not at all.
Okay. Would it ever bother you if there was not a sense of Shabbat in the state of Israel? If Israel did not have a sense of Shabbat, would that bother you?
That would certainly bother me.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I don't understand is this. Israel itself is this unifying symbol of Jewish peoplehood. We understand it was created for the Jewish people. We also understand that there is, within even the Israeli people who are secular, a feeling that a form of Jewish tradition represents something larger than themselves. Even if they don't want to eat kosher, they want kosher restaurants to be there. Even if they go to the beach on Shabbat, don't set foot in a synagogue on Shabbat, they're always going to tell you the synagogue they don't go to is the Orthodox synagogue. Okay, and it seems to me that Israelis are now saying, you know what, it's sort of what Thane said, if you go to the Western Wall, it means something different to the Orthodox community than it does to the non-Orthodox community. And of all the issues we're going to make a simus over, it's not whether the Western Wall has a mechitza. But I don't hear within Israel an anger at the mechitza at the Western Wall. And on major Jewish holidays, it's all black hat. So that the temple at the wall, which you describe perfectly accurately, most Jews don't understand it. It's not the Western Wall of the temple. But at the same time, it has a meaning within the Orthodox community, so that when I, with my wife, go to the Western Wall, it never offends me to stand on one side of the mechitza and she's on the other. Never occurred to me to be offended. And I like the idea. I wish there were a third section at the wall, and I'd like it to be right there. But if they put it down by Robinson's Arch, that's okay too. But I am not offended when I go into the Western Wall that it is at the moment treated in a halakhic Orthodox fashion. And it is Jewish tradition presence, dripping from that wall. And Israel, I want Israel to have that in general. And at the moment, the Israeli people don't see it.
Again, I'm simply not sure that you were right.
Oh, I'm
Look
right.
at the polls.
No.
Let me, first of all...
What they're upset with is, and you pointed this out, they're upset with money. They don't like the fact that the Orthodox are not contributing, and they're not particularly in the army. They don't care about ritual.
Let me suggest to you, there are a lot of people who are offended. And if the state of Israel is going to bring every tourist group and every birthright group, I mean, I go to the wall every time I'm in Israel.
And it upsets you every time.
And if this is going to be a sort of a central symbol of what Israel is all about, then since for the great majority of Jews who pray in a particular way, the fact that their prayer style is excluded is in fact problematic for them and offensive for them. It's important for you to understand that. Yeah. It is not a halakhic issue. Yeshayahu Leibowitz talked about that.
I understand.
The wall is the discotheque.
When you go,
it's not a halakhic question.
When you go with groups of your own,
yes,
do you make an issue of this for them? Because when I go with groups of my own, they understand what this is.
We used to,
and this does not.
All right, a specific.
It's not offensive to anybody.
A specific question. It used to be, when we used to go with groups, it used to be we would pray in the plaza, not up against the wall. There's a mechitza there, but in the plaza behind.
Too.
That's where we would pray.
That too.
And that used to be acceptable. We can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore.
I understand. That, by the way,
that is no longer acceptable.
Okay.
Mark, let me add one thing to what you said. It has been said that basically with this group who really want the Robinson Arch Wall, will they be there morning and night, do mincha and arvit and shacharit? Will they come, will they stay 24 hours as the Kotel is being, people go there 24 hours? The answer is no, they want to go only once a month. Not only that, will the majority of the people who go there that once a month, do they pray every morning at home? Do they care
to
do?
This is not a place for religious
what I'm trying
testing.
to say, what I'm trying to say is, and they have equal access. They could go anywhere in the Kotel with that equal access. Two more things, and which is the same thing. During the time of Mihu Yehudi, who was a Jew, 20-something years ago, there was a delegation of Israeli members of Knesset from all walks of life, from the left to the ultra-Orthodox. A similar delegation came here 4 or 5 years ago, and I know that because they stopped in my synagogue. And they went and visited different synagogues in the United States to see the Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox. I was told personally by several members of that delegation then and also 4 or 5 years ago from Peretz and from Labor. It says, I don't identify with that Judaism. I'm a secular Jew, they say. But when I go to synagogue, I know where I'm going to go. Like you mentioned, I'm going to go to the traditional synagogue. I do not identify with a synagogue that there is a microphone or they open up the... even the secular, non-religious Israeli members of Knesset mention that. And that is why maybe Reform and Conservative is not taking roots in Israel, because the majority of the Israelis do not identify with
Okay,
it.
I interrupted Thane, and I want to come back to you.
Thanks.
You were saying.
Well, let me just, the last thing. I like my Marines analogy, because I do. It fits with what Elie just said. I just do. I just think when I want a wall protected, I want the Marines. And when it comes to this particular wall, the Kotel, I'm going to defer to the Orthodox for the very things that Elie said, because I'm not going to go there 3 times. I was just there in August. I never went close to the wall. I brought friends with me. It's not that I'm not uncomfortable there. I just don't feel that that's for me. When Moshe Dayan liberated it, I would have been a paratrooper that would have been crying at the wall. I would have been one of those guys. But on day 2, I don't know if I would have felt that I wanted to pray there.
And
It's
what's the
different.
therefore?
So, all right, let me just go back to this. Everything we've just talked about for the last 25 minutes is upsetting to me. And I'll tell you, it's totally upsetting. I'll tell you, for something that we didn't discuss yet. For Jews, this is totally normal, right? Of course, we should debate, we should argue, we should fight about the nuances of what it means to be a Jew, whether it means the wall or whether it means who becomes a Jew. This discussion is like Exhibit A for the UNESCO resolutions. They would love this, because this just says, you know, you're not even from there. You don't even know who belongs there. You don't know who's really connected to these walls. You don't know anything about this. You're a bunch of Brooklyn Jews who decide to take these trips, and then some of you start to live, but you're foreign to this discussion. You're not even sure. I mean, we Muslims would never even spend a second worrying about this. We're all Muslims. And for you, we're not sure who's a Jew. For you, we don't know who's entitled to go to the wall. If not all Jews are, then you really don't belong. The wall doesn't belong to you. So that's what I said before when you said, well, what's the remedy? I said, well, one thing I don't like is actually Eric's remedy, which is, yeah, you know, it sort of speaks to the confrontation that we should make this argument. I would like for this to go away because it plays into the worst hands of the enemies of the Jews. It just speaks to a sense of disconnection, a sense of foreignness, a sense of just genuine alienation from that land, instead of what's really an entitlement, a birthright, what we're all belonging there, and that we should be able to somehow work this out in not a public way.
This is a huge misread of the realities of the American Jewish community. Speak to professors on campus where you have large Jewish populations, and they will tell you, I don't know if I should mention a name here, maybe I better not, but
Mention the name.
Sylvia Barak-Fishman. I was at a meeting with her, and
she's a modern Orthodox Jew.
A modern Orthodox Jew who was seated around the table, and we were talking with Israeli representatives who used to, excuse me, we're sounding like you gentlemen. And we're saying, oh, this isn't an issue, nobody really cares, you know, we don't really get it, and so on. And Dr. Fishman says, on campus, it's not the Palestinians that I worry about. We know how to answer those arguments. But I have students who are Reform and Conservative Jews. That's how they identify. The essence of their Jewish identity is through their synagogue and their connection with their rabbi. That is how they conceive of themselves Jewishly. And all that they understand is that the Jewish state somehow rejects them, doesn't permit their rabbis to be rabbis, doesn't permit their institutions to get the support everybody else gets the support. They are angry and offended. And no matter how much education, I'm paraphrasing here, how much education we do here, they're still angry and offended. It's not a matter of we're going to give them a class and this is going to go away. And she was saying to the Israelis, you need to help us with this. Stop dismissing it. Stop saying it's going to go away. Stop saying it's not important. To my kids, it's important. And with all due respect, you need to understand that. I think that you know, perhaps you're simply not exposed to what is the majority of the American Jewish community and the deep sentiments that exist here from people who care about Judaism and want desperately to care about Israel.
I would add to that. I want to segue into that point, from that point. At the same time we're talking here, and I mentioned this earlier, the growing Orthodox assertiveness within Israel in terms of trying to remake Israeli society in the image that they see is the right image, whatever that means. That can't be ignored. In terms of demographics, Last figures I saw was that 25% of first graders in Israel today are ultra-Orthodox. If you're looking in Jerusalem, it's way over 50%. The implication of that is that the last 6 months since June 25th is that the Orthodox have demonstrated to themselves, we've got a lot of power and let's use it. Now, the challenge then to American Jewish leaders, the challenge to secular Israelis, the challenge to anyone who's concerned about what is the future of the Jewish state is left unchecked. This growing Orthodox assertiveness is, we have the Torah, you don't. The Torah tells us what to do. Let's do what the Torah tells us. Well, you keep on going down that road, you will have a Jewish state that will be deeply, deeply problematical by democratic norms. It'll be deeply problematical by Jewish norms, by peoplehood norms. So I don't, again, like you, I don't think, and like Rabbi Abadie, I don't think the Kotel is the most important issue confronting Israeli society. I think it's symbolic of a very deep, critical issue of what do we mean by the future of the Jewish state and its future relationship to the Jewish people.
And are you in some sense answering Thane?
Absolutely. I think Thane is focusing on, let the Orthodox have it. You know, they cherish it. Israel is a traditional society. The synagogue they don't go to is the Orthodox synagogue. So therefore, let's move on.
He's only talking about the wall.
I am talking about it, but I also
He's
thought
only
that
talking about the wall.
what Mark said earlier, by the way, I thought that was one of your finest hours. At that point, by going off the wall for a moment to talk about, you know, isn't this just really a piece of it, and it doesn't diminish people's connection to the whole. It's just a piece of it. Yes, look, this is why I started off by saying I think there's a big difference between conversion as to who's a Jew.
Yes, you did say that. I
said that's a bigger difference. Is there a way to bifurcate this issue? Because I do think that if it means more, if the wall means more to the religious, then I would defer to them in the same way that I would defer to Israelis when it comes to the IDF. I'm not prepared to tell people for whom it means more about the wall, to tell them, like, you know what, it's really for all of us, and this is a perfect...
I'm a religious person. I am offended by the notion that somehow their religious concerns are more legitimate than mine.
All right.
I led a movement of religious people, and we had 6,000 people on Shabbat in Boston praying with all the fervor of the ultra-Orthodox. You are not entitled to tell me that my religious concerns are less important than the religious concerns of other Jews.
That
You
is
see
kind of
what you
interesting.
started? Very well done.
I said
very
it was,
well done.
okay.
Very well done.
All right.
By the way, how do you feel about the fact that Birthright Israel has now said it's going to break with the Reform movement and will not formally take students through the Reform movement on Birthright tours?
I mean, apparently they're not recruiting enough people to go, and I think that's terrible.
The Reform movement.
Yeah, I think that's terrible.
But
They
so
need
what?
to be recruiting
Okay,
more.
but supposing they're recruiting fewer. So what? Why break with them?
Oh, well, all right. I'm not familiar with the specifics of
Yeah,
the...
oh wait, would you agree that that's outrageous? How counterproductive is it
What is the
for
break?
Birthright Israel to say, you know, there are not enough, Reform movement is not generating enough Reform students, and therefore, from now on, we're not going to take any students through the Reform movement. If they have 5, take 5. What's the point here?
The point is expenditures. I mean, the Birthright spend a lot of money. The question, what do you have in return?
On individuals.
What do you have on return?
Individuals.
I'm sure individuals, Reform individuals, will be able to join any
Yeah,
other
they
group.
just can't. Yeah, they can't.
Maybe
do it
they cannot
Reform
join
movement.
as a
But
Reform
why would
movement.
you want to cut off the Reform movement from what?
I don't know
what's
why.
behind
I really
that?
don't know why that
Well,
was done.
look, again, if you want to talk technicalities,
No, does it offend you?
it offends me deeply because of, again, a somewhat different reason, and that is that different American Jews are going to need different avenues of connectedness to Judaic heritage.
I agree with that.
And that's what we do here in the States, and I happen to find that model to be very
agree,
attractive.
of course.
Suddenly along comes the Birthright people for reasons that are technical, perhaps economic. It's like canceling a college course that doesn't have enough registrants. But if the college course is important enough, the university will sponsor it anyway. Now, if you have one trip, if you will, under Reform auspices, they're getting a point of view and a direction that they would not be getting otherwise.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Okay,
I think it should be cherished.
I'm sorry. I want you to be stronger in your criticism, because it fits the very model that is bothering you. What you said was, in essence, what bothers you about the Israeli model that you described is that you don't want, although you are a passionate Orthodox Jew yourself,
Right.
you do not want Orthodoxy to have a stranglehold
Exactly.
on the life of the state of Israel. Birthright Israel is feeding right into that by saying, we're going to exclude. Why would Birthright exclude? And if it turns out that the Reform movement isn't producing enough, it can't be about money. Every student is supported the same way. It's a statement that says, you know what, we like the way the kids come back the kids who are Orthodox, who go to Birthright Israel, they come back and we think they're better. It is a counterproductive, un-Jewish, in no way laudable position for Birthright Israel to take, and Birthright has traditionally been one of the shining examples of Klal Yisrael, on both sides of the ocean, coming together for the betterment of the state of Israel and for American Jewry. Eric, I was flabbergasted.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Birthright needs to be a unifying force.
Right.
And I'm the first to say I want the reform movement, to find more kids and to recruit more kids.
I think it's.
We need a cooperative
Is
relationship.
there something there that we don't know about between
Well,
the reform movement and Birthright that
they're keeping it a secret.
that broke down those?
By the way,
those
it is not
relationships?
one of the top 5 most significant events, but I did want to make sure I mentioned it. Come back to Hotovely before we have to conclude this first portion. See what you did. Hotovely says, Hotovely is denied the ability to speak at Princeton because pro-BDS people say she's a racist.
Initially, I thought that this student group had, in fact, demanded that she not be permitted to speak. It turns out they came out, were very clear. They issued a statement. They said, we never said that. We absolutely never said that. We were protesting the fact that there are guidelines that are applied unevenly to people on the right and the left, and that was the point that we make. It was Hillel. It was Hillel that canceled
caved.
this.
I'd say
and
it was
not
the rabbi
student
of
group.
Hillel.
Okay,
that
fine.
canceled
And
that.
by the way, Hillel.
It was the rabbi of
was-
Hillel that
Fine.
canceled that.
Excusable.
Okay, and National Hillel apologizes.
Right.
Now, Hotovely then is asked by a news correspondent who says to her, gee, how do you feel about the fact that you were denied access to the Princeton platform, although she did speak at Chabad? And do you understand that it reflects a growing chasm between young American Jews and the state of Israel? And she gives an answer about that a little bit. And they push her a little bit. And then she says, the one thing I do want to say is, I feel that American Jews who do not have children in the military in general, they're not in Afghanistan, they're not in Iraq, American Jews do not experience the emotional pain that a parent feels when their child is in military danger. And I don't think that there are many American Jews who simply cannot understand the Israeli experience. For saying that, this woman was pilloried. And ultimately, she was forced by Netanyahu government under threat of being thrown out of the Knesset to apologize. And I say to myself, and then I want to hear what you have to say, all she did was tell the truth. All she did was tell the truth. American Jews don't, by and large, appreciate what it is to have a child in harm's way like that. And by the way, the American Jews who do are often the parents of lone soldiers who go to Israel and serve. And all she said was, there's a lack of understanding. Now, was she right?
Of course she was right.
Was she right?
It's demonstrably true in
Was
every
she
way.
right?
It's a simplification. Some of the things she said were right, and some of the things she said were wrong.
She's criticized for saying one thing and one thing only.
No, she said, first of all, she said several things.
But she's only criticized for one thing. All of it is about how dare you disparage American Jews. This is not disparaging American Jews.
No, she showed ignorance of American Jews.
Well, it's not
That is-
ignorance.
her statement
No, it
was
is ignorance.
How is it ignorance?
In the United States, we have a volunteer army. wait a minute. We have a
Do
volunteer
American
army.
Jews have
Wait.
children in serving in the military?
And,
by and large.
And in a volunteer army, middle-class, college-educated kids, middle class and upper middle class, do not serve in the military.
So
not
what?
True. It's not true
so
just
what,
for
though?
Jews, it's true for
But
everybody else.
Yes, but she was...
It's also true, that two parties in her coalition, in which she serves, as a matter of principle, don't send their kids to the military. It's also true...
Also, all irrelevant. All irrelevant.
Also true that she didn't serve in the military.
It's irrelevant.
I-
All she's saying is, this is the general American Jewish experience.
Her statement-
That's all, and she's right.
She spoke
Mark.
dismissively.
It wasn't, boy, I
She
heard
spoke-
it.
Mark.
I
she
heard
spoke-
it. It was not dismissive.
She
It was not
she used
dismissive.
the term, they have a convenient life. That
They
was her
do.
term.
We do. We
I
do.
don't-
Oh my goodness.
Have you ever been to the mall?
We do.
Yeah. Mark, I
really
We
have...
have the most. We have the
too.
most. By the way, she doesn't know English well enough. The word "convenient" is a little off, but she was translating from her in Hebrew. What she meant was, we have the best, easiest,
Cushier.
non-threatening,
She meant cushier.
cushy life American world Jewry
And how is that
has
not
had
true?
throughout history.
She had every right to say what she said. I'm glad that she said it. People who criticized her were being ridiculous.
Okay, now we got. And you say.
Let me say, you are 100% correct. Her statement was 100% factually correct. Unfortunately, the hypocrisy of the political correctness train that we live in, or the era that we live in, is, and especially many of those, they clamor for freedom of speech, and yet they will not allow somebody to have a freedom of speech to express her opinion. And the moment she expresses her opinion, she is castigated.
Why did
of a
Netanyahu?
truth.
Why did Netanyahu understand what you're saying?
And I can assure you 100% that Netanyahu understood very well what she said, and he agrees with what she said.
What?
But for political reason, he has to castigate her.
Political reasons
And that's the
of what-
only reason.
And political reasons to placate whom?
To placate the reform or American jury.
To make Rick Jacobs happy.
I have to
Hold
say
on a
that.
second, no.
So
How do you see
he
it?
gave in
Come on,
this
first of all,
time because it's easier to give in here than, and he did not
Well,
give in the Kotel
First of
issue.
all, you can't pin this one on the reform movement. The entire Jewish leadership was, again, accepting the Orthodox, perhaps. But the reaction
But that's
generally...
a sizable amount.
I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying, once you get beyond orthodoxy...
upset?
Was I upset? I was not upset by her factually. What I was upset by was context. That she came here. She was essentially in actually a very positive position because I sympathize with the way...
Where did she say it?
I'm sorry?
Where did she say
She
it?
said on the radio.
It wasn't the radio.
Wasn't the radio?
It was on television.
It was on television. Okay, that's what I meant. Yeah.
And it was on an Israeli television.
Yeah. And therefore...
Well, which is not like she came
context,
here
of
and
course.
No, she came here.
She came here. She had an experience. She was asked, "What do you think about the disconnection between young American Jews and
Yes.
and she said, I want to say something larger. There's a disconnect between American Jews and Israel, and in part it's because they don't experience what we experience. By the way, she says it in the loveliest way.
And she's a lovely person.
And she's
I know her personally.
It wasn't bitter. It wasn't mean. It didn't reek of criticism. She was just describing something.
Okay, in the
and you agree with her.
I don't disagree with her
You
factually.
agree with her.
I would not have made those statements were I in her position because I think her job in coming here, and that's why I said it started when she came here, her job in coming here is to try to build bridges, try to muster support for Israel. She was making a statement that essentially said, hands off, guys, you're in a different position.
Okay, that's not
By
what she
using the
said.
term
Oh, that's not what she
convenience, by the way,
Yes.
the assumption is that we're better. That's how it came across.
That's what I was saying. Convenient was a dismissive term, however
And-
much you may say that
and-
it's
yeah,
not.
and basically when
that's the way that it was heard.
When
here.
AJC protested, we did not protest on the facts. She was factually correct. We were protesting the dissing of American Jewry.
She wasn't dissing anybody. She was simply describing a situation.
And
But
And
also-
what I now hear Steve Bayme saying is,
Yeah.
I don't want to hear Israelis tell the truth.
hold it, I never said
didn't
that.
say
I never said that at
Okay,
all.
but you don't like the fact that she said it. You're
Unfortunately,
not arguing that it's true or not.
I'm certainly not arguing about the facts of the matter. What I'm suggesting is that her job as an ambassador here, as coming here, should have been to try to build better bridges.
She did.
I didn't see any bridges being built.
She did. She went on Israeli television. She said when she was pushed by what was obviously somebody who was out to get her, she said in the loveliest way, the problem is American Jews don't experience what we experience, so they don't have the same kind of understanding. I want every Israeli leader to say that. And I don't consider that to be dismissive of me or critical of me. It makes me think. I want American Jews to think. What does it mean to experience Israeli life? By the way, you spent a career trying to help us understand that. True. So,
Mark, you're correct. We don't want to hear the truth. But again, it's to the greater problem of political correctness. We don't want to hear the truth. We don't want to see the truth. We don't want to know about the truth. We just want to say things that makes us feel good. And this statement did not make the American jury feel good.
But it works the other way.
But is it the truth? 100%
It works
true.
the other way. They don't want to hear about our religious concerns either.
No, they want to hear. They're just dismissing them.
You know,
It's not that they don't want to hear. They might be
no,
want to
they
hear.
don't want to hear. Believe me, they don't want to hear. The whole point is we need a dialogue.
yes.
We need a thoughtful
Yes,
100%.
dialogue.
Honest.
And
I agree with you.
Honest dialogue.
I like the fact that you spoke
Yes.
up. It distresses me that more Israeli leaders don't speak
Exactly.
up. But my own view is we need a different tone and a different approach so that we're really hearing each other.
I'm
I
with
think
you.
the parallel
I'm with
to
you
me,
on
the
that.
parallel to me is this issue of assimilation. I want Israelis to come here and to tell us, yes, you guys have a serious problem with assimilation. I want to hear that, but I want to hear the message in the context of you're not going to disappear tomorrow. That's not on the horizon. We want to work with you together to assist you in furthering Jewish
I like that
continuity.
very much. Oh, she did not say we're going to. There was nothing about what she said that suggested.
I'm saying it's a parallel.
Okay.
That's all.
I want to just add one last thing about Hotovely. Context matters because you started off by explaining to the audience that this was in the context of her being disinvited to speak at Hillel. Let me just say, welcome to my world. You know, I've been unfortunately involved in university life for most of my professional life, and I speak around the country, and I get booed around the country. People pound on desks. To be pro-Israel is a curse on a university campus.
Even though you've been a liberal advocate your entire life.
I was the literary editor for Tikkun magazine. That's how bad it is. If you say anything favorable to Israel, you're a pariah. And I think that that's the context in which what she said was. What she was saying was, look, I spoke in Berkeley recently. Most of the, I wouldn't say most, but a number of the people screaming at me were Jews, right? And that's what she was talking about. She was talking about a smugness. That's why I think what she said was calmer and nicer and lovelier than what she might have even meant, which is to say, this is a function of American Jews for whom, especially on a university campus, if you want to get invited to the right fraternity or sorority, if you want to be invited to the right cocktail party, you have to actually say Israel's the greatest human rights violator in the planet. And if you're a Jew, you have the benefit of the moral narcissism. Look at me, I'm a Jew, and I criticize my people. Look at me, how special am I? That's the context of this. This woman was disinvited to speak at a university in the United States because she's an Israeli.
By a rabbi.
By a rabbi. And so for this kind of arrogance, the smugness, and let me just say, so I want to come back to my good friend Eric, who and I never agree on anything. Let me just say, you know, one of the things that we can talk about birthright is, it's not clear to me that the birthright issue isn't related to the fact that maybe Reform Jews, the children of Reform Jews, have less of an interest for all of your evangelizing here on Mark's show about we care more about the religious preferences. I'm not so sure that's true. It may be true for you. I think American Jews on the Reform movement care about Tikkun Olam. I'm not sure they care about Israel. I don't think Israel's that important to them. I think that's the reason why I didn't know that it was Birthright who'd made this decision to distance itself from Reform Jewish students.
There's nothing positive about Birthright saying to any segment of American Jewry, you're no longer part of the program. Okay, fabulous, thank you. Bo, you see what you did? You gave us a subject.
And I said it was an historic day.
And it is. And by the way,
It ran the table.
I would say that although I found all of the four things you said, each of you said was the most important, significant event, for me, I think the impact of what this failed compromise did, together with what Donald Trump does vis-a-vis Jerusalem at the end of the year, were two sides of a similar coin and represented for me the overall most significant event. So I'm very glad we started there. When we come back for part 2, we'll go to the other things that we've said, and I also want to know who your person of the year, Jewish person of the year is. That is part 1 of our year-end Jewish retrospective of 2017 with Thane Rosenbaum, Yoffie, Steve Bayme, Elie Abadie. I hope you've enjoyed hearing their analysis and perspective, and that you'll be with us again for part 2, which again will include their nominees for Jewish Person of the Year for 2017. By the way, speaking of events of some importance this year, in August of 2017, an event touched us here at JBS as Verizon Fios added JBS to their lineup as channel 798, and millions of more homes now can watch programs like this one with the brilliant individuals we're privileged to showcase on JBS every single week. And now only Charter Spectrum and Comcast have yet to also make JBS available to their subscribers. Hopefully that'll happen in 2018. And that gives me a quick moment to remind you, if you enjoy JBS, if you appreciate hearing the likes of Thane Rosenbaum, Steve Bayme, Yoffie, and Elie Abadie, and all the fabulous people you see day in and day out here on JBS, please consider making a tax-deductible donation before the end of this calendar year. Participate in a matching gift by Gloria and Harvey Cayley. It'll mean the world to us. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.